The next reader is Sarah Miner, and she's going to be introduced by Hillary Gant.
So I guess Sarah thought I was going to try to be funny, and I'm not, and I'm really glad now, because now I don't have to follow the harmonica. Sarah Miner has a chair in my apartment. It is brown leather, and my friend bought it at Goodwill for $25, and I stole it when he moved to South Carolina. And sometimes other people sit in it, and it's usually covered in papers, but I think of it as Sarah's chair. Because when she comes over and sits in it, and I sit across from her in the yellow chair, which my orange cat is slowly and maliciously destroying, we talk about subjects I had no voice for talking about before I came here. And I like that version of the chair, so I think of it that way. It is a hard thing to be a writer, and there are decisions you have to make all the time that other people don't like. Do I change this piece to make it more like what other people want, and should I take a night job to do this poverty-inducing thing I love? And also harder decisions like, what is the best way to make sure my life is full of the meaning that I have always found in books? And how do I construct an artist's life when a lot of the people I love dearly don't even understand what that is, much less how to go about it? These are questions I grapple with, and for a long time I had understood that part of the payment for getting to be a creative person was to have to try to answer these questions alone. But now Sarah Miner has a chair in my apartment, and even if she doesn't have all the answers, she takes the time and she recognizes the questions, and I find myself very thankful that I was wrong about the terms of a writer's arrangement with creativity. And I'm thankful for Sarah. I had up until recently been doing most of my learning from books by dead white men, which bothered me sort of, except that they wrote really good books, and it was writing worth learning. I memorized the Faulkner Six, the verities of the heart that make for writing with me in sinew in it, that say something about the human condition: honor, compassion, sacrifice, pride, pity, love. I learned to drink my whiskey straight so I could write my stories the same way. I tried to leave fear at the doorstep of my workshop and never to bring it inside. I had no way to talk about what I wanted to do because before I came to this place, there was no one I knew who wanted what I wanted, but Sarah does. Sarah's work makes a reader work as hard as she does, and the rewards are equal to the effort. Sarah writes about narwhals and mermaids, or the interiors of houses, or the discovery of wine, but what her work says is about compassion and sacrifice. Sarah writes about the verities of the heart and about the lines and spaces between people that keep us from talking about what really matters. In her daily life, Sarah crosses those boundaries. Sarah is not afraid. Sarah is the kind of writer I thought I would never actually meet. And Sarah sits in her chair in my apartment and talks to me about how to become the kind of writer we both want to be, and I do not have to try to answer these questions alone. So tonight, I am honored to introduce to all of you a writer I am proud to call my very dear friend, Sarah Miner.
I don't really know what to say about that, but thank you very much, Hillary. I love you. Okay. So what I'm reading tonight is definitely in progress. I would consider it to be. It's actually in the middle of a series of edits that are mostly in my head right now. So a few of you have grappled with it in this form, so but I'm going to read it just straight today. Okay. Here, sit. In 1975, Carolee Schneeman, a performance and body artist, enacted her piece Interior Scroll on a stage in Hampton, New York. During this piece, Schneeman ritualistically stood naked on a table, painted her body with mud, and slowly extracted a paper scroll from her vagina while reading it aloud. Schneeman called it a piece on narrative, knowledge, and the interior. Wine tasters at an old wooden bar grow drunk and talk with a swollen-gummed viticulturist. Viticulturist weaves an ancient tale of Persia, of eunuchs, of love, and death, and the origin of wine, but is corrected more than twice by the unusual patrons at his bar. The wine tasting lasts the afternoon, the sloshing of tannins between two cheeks, the viticulturists and their gooding sheep, the empty rows of winter vineyards and the slanted sun on ranch grasses. The tasters are warm and their limbs hang loose, sat at an old wooden bar in bright sundresses, across which stands a swollen-gummed viticulturist, the least suspicious of the taster's questioning. But how does the juice get from grapes to bottles? What, sir, is the origin of wine? Well, explained the swollen-gummed viticulturist, well, in the old days, when my ancestors made wine, they sat a large bladder, an animal bladder, in a wooden barrel and filled it with grapes. In the old days, they would press the bladder down with a weight to crush and destem the fruit. As you can imagine, they didn't have compressed air or electric wine presses. In the old days, they used their arms. And what of before that? Do you know how wine was first created? What, sir, is the origin of wine? Said the swollen-gummed viticulturist. Do you know of the legend of the Persian king and his harem, of the banished woman and the mistaken poison? Nothing of the legend. We have some time. Tell us, viticulturist, man of wine. Ahem, said the swollen-gummed viticulturist. Ahem, downing the bottom of his glass. It goes like this. Once there was a Persian king, a king of Persia by the name of Jamshid. Like all kings of Persia, this Persian king had a great palace and a harem. A harem of mothers and wives and sisters and daughters in an inner courtyard with sunlight and shining plates of dates, with smoking pipes and spices and oils and pools where the women of the harem swam nude among eunuch guards, and 4 high walls under one flat patch of gentle blue sky. One day in the harem of Jamshid, the king of Persia with many wives and sisters and daughters in an inner courtyard with sunlight and shining plates of dates, it was discovered that one of the eunuch guards was in fact not a eunuch, not at all. But how was he discovered there? Interrupted one of the wine tasters. How could a eunuch hope to pass for a non-eunuch? Well, said the viticulturist, as you can imagine, it is fairly simple to discern a eunuch from a non-eunuch. Fairly simple to accidentally reveal oneself in a time of robes, in a time not of undergarments. This was not a wise non-eunuch, as you can imagine. This unwise non-eunuch was discovered, unfortunately, just after being in the terribly unlucky company of one of the women in the harem, not a mother or a daughter or a sister, but a young wife of Jamshid, the king of Persia. And what was to be expected? What was to be thought of the young wife of the king of Persia in the presence of a non-eunuch in a courtyard with sunlight and shining plates of dates, with just one patch of blue sky, with oils and smoking pipes most of all? Well, what I can tell you here, in confidence, is that nothing could be expected of the young wife, because the young wife of Jamshid, the king of Persia, was not fond of eunuchs or non-eunuchs in the least. This young wife of Jamshid, actually, was only quite fond of another of Jamshid's young wives, not a mother or a daughter or a sister, but a second cousin, with which, says the swollen-gummed viticulturist, with another knowing look, much might have been expected. Well, Jamshid, the king of Persia, did not know this fondness between young wives, which was really a great love, you might say. He could not and would not know, and was, as you can imagine, quite unpleased with the situation. The king of Persia, Jamshid, whose harem had contained a non-eunuch, a eunuch in disguise, was not at all pleased. So, in regard to the non-eunuch, the king ordered some chopping. They chopped one bit and then the next. The next was his head. Well, then he was not a non-eunuch at all. He was then very much a eunuch, and then he was very much dead, as you can imagine. And in regards to the young wife, Jamshid's own young wife, the young wife of the king of Persia, who had a great love, but who had been discovered in the unlucky presence of the non-eunuch, who was now a dead eunuch, she was banished to the wilderness of the desert alone. Out in the wilderness of the desert, as you can imagine, there are no shining plates of dates or oils or smoking pipes. No mothers or daughters or sisters or young or old wives or second cousins to keep company, and no pools. That especially. No great loves or pools of water in the least. There is mostly sand and sky. In the wilderness of the desert, the young wife of Jamshid, the king of Persia, did discover there to be more sky, much more than one gentle patch of flat blue, and sometimes, in the distance, a single cloud. But this was not enough to please Jamshid's own young wife. Jamshid, the king of Persia's wife, who had a name, of course, a name that was not recorded or remembered, as you can imagine, though it is important, as you will later discover.